Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Remember, O most gracious Virgin Mary,
that never was it known that anyone would neglect thy protection, implored thy help, or sought thy intercession, was left unaided. Inspired by this confidence, I fly unto thee, O Virgin, my mother. To thee do I come, before thee I stand, sinful and sorrowful. O Mother of the Word incarnate, despise not my petitions, but in thy mercy hear and answer us. Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. That prayer got me through seminary. Every time I got kicked out or got close to being kicked out, it helped me to persevere. Our Lady is a powerful intercessor, and we can never go to her enough. I just want to point that out. So I'm trying. Let's start first and foremost, I guess, with the Latin Mass. I've been asked this 1,000 times, mostly by priests of a certain vintage. Why do you do the Latin Mass? You're a diocesan priest. I've heard it from prelates, bishops, monsignors. You know, you're not part of the FSSP. You're not part of the Institute of Christ the King. You're not part of the Friars of the Immaculate. Why do you do the Latin Mass? Why? And I have a very simple answer for them, and I'll share the story with you as well. I was tricked into it. Now, originally I'm from Michigan, and I'm still technically a priest of the Diocese of Saginaw, which is known for, and I'll be as charitable as possible, for its intense progressivism. I was told that I was pre-Vatican II, and that meant I was insane, and that I shouldn't be allowed near people. And then they would tell me they wanted me to be ministering to the people who were in hospitals, because most of those priests had a great deal of difficulty, in spite of their progressivism, they had a great deal of difficulty confronting death. They did not like hospice calls, hospital calls, sickbed calls, last rites calls. And I became, in the Diocese of Saginaw, no matter where I was, and it's 11 counties across Michigan. It goes all the way from Lake Huron all the way over to practically Grand Rapids, and then it goes all the way from just north of Interstate 69, which cuts the state in half to the capital, all the way up to just north of the little crook in the thumb, Saginaw Bay. And so it's a very large diocese, and I was the guy I was the one priest who answered his phone at night and on Sundays and on Mondays and Tuesdays and whatnot. But anyways, and so I did an awful lot of that. And initially, I took it to prayer because the guy in me, and we'll get to my biography, but I mean, I've been around and I've done other things besides priesthood. But anyway, so the guy in me wanted to fix this. I wanted those guys to do their work. You know, we all have our job. Why don't you do your work? But in prayer, it came to me that, don't worry, Father, you're building an army. And we'll get to building the army. But I mean, poor souls and souls of faith departed really do need the grace of the sacraments. And so I've leaned heavily into my army of souls. And so oftentimes at Mass, I'm not only remembering souls and people that I know who've passed, but also those souls. And I saw it on a plaque here somewhere, those souls who have no one to pray for them. Because sadly at our funerals these days, we canonize everybody. And I've always told people, do not ever canonize me. In fact, what I want you to do when I die is find somebody or some monastery or somewhere that they can do the 30-day Gregorian Masses, because you're going to need to do some heavy lifting to get me out of purgatory. But so why the Latin Mass? I was tricked into it. And how was I tricked into it? Well, so here I am. I was in stealth mode. I was in the Diocese of Saginaw, and I was at a parish, and the bishop, when he assigned me to the parish as a deacon, as a transitional deacon, he said, well, he's always been nice to me, but all of these guys are so far left of center, I'm sure he hates my guts. So be careful. And that's, welcome to your new parish, be careful. And so I was kind of like, what do I do? How do I do? Where do I go? And I kept placing it in Our Lady's hands, and I kept taking it to Our Lord of the Blessed Sacrament. Well, so my priest friend, I have a priest friend from Slovakia, and he actually was the priest who fostered my vocation. I had been thrown out of parishes for being too traditional, and in too traditional meant I knelt during the consecration. I'm sure some of you may have experienced crazy things like that. And then when I decided to go into seminary, somebody bought me breviaries, a set of breviary, so I was learning how to pray the breviary, and I would pray the breviary after Mass, and I was told by the pastor that all that kneeling I was doing was a distraction, and this showing off with the breviary was something. So my vocation was not fostered. And then at the time I was looking to pursue my vocation hardcore, I think it was 39 or 40. And I was told I was too old. I was told engineers don't make good priests. I was told your military, we're people of peace and we can't have a military man. It didn't matter that I was a non-combatant and flew in hostile areas without a single. The worst I think I had was a knife that was meant for cutting parachute cord if I would have jumped out of the airplane and lived. In the midst of this, I stumbled across this little Slovak parish, seated 250 people in the midst of suburban Detroit, where the parishes seat like thousands of people. They're all mega churches, except this little tiny church. And so I had been told, stay away from them, they're crazy. And then I had been told, all this kneeling and all this praying, you're crazy. So I went, the engineer in me went, if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C. And I said, well, let me check this out. I walked in there in the midst of just an evening Mass followed by exposition and adoration, and I fell in love. And rewinding back to my own sinfulness, which will come out in the biography, and maybe I'll intersperse it in this, is before I ever went, about 10 years before, my brother was doing a pilgrimage to Mother Angelica's place down in Irondale, and I was friends with priests, and my pastor said, hey, you should go just so that we can laugh about it when you get back. And I said, that sounds good to me. I'll take it, I'll take vacation, I'll go down. And it was, of all funny things, it was beginning of April, so April Fools, Father Dave, haha. But so I go down there with my brother and his group of the young adult prayer group, and they were very, very Orthodox, and they were all kind of attached, strangely enough, 10 years before I ever walked in the door of the place, to this little Slovak church. And so we go down there, and my clothes had been, my luggage had been picked up by somebody in Chicago, and I was left with women's clothes and high-heeled shoes. She was left with blue jeans and heavy metal t-shirts. So I don't know, I thought she got the better part of the deal because she could probably wear it, and I most certainly was not going to wear what she left me. And so I gave that to American Airlines, and they said, we'll get it to your hotel room. So the next day I had to dress like my brother, who was much more conservative than I was. And so dressed like my brother on sometime around April Fool's Day, we get to Mother Angelica's just in time for Mass. So trying to move any kind of group is difficult. And so we couldn't fit. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to the chapel in Irondale. It's tiny. It's minuscule. And there's just enough room for a skinny guy to squeeze between that back wall and the last pew, and that's where I was. And so I'm there, and I'm kind of flustered. I'm like, my luggage. And I put anything important in there, and thank God it was in the 1990s, so we really didn't have anything important. No cell phones. You were talking about how we don't go anywhere without a cell phone or digital watch and all this stuff. So I had nothing of value. I didn't. My computer sat on the desk and weighed a ton, so I didn't have to worry about that. But I was just like, did I have that book in there did I have something valuable to me, or a watch or something? And so I'm very preoccupied. And so we squish in behind that last row, behind that last pew actually, and we're standing. And the bell rings, and I had never heard a bell ring in a church since I was 5 or 6. Then everybody stands up, the rustle of the bodies standing, and in comes this most beautiful procession. And I'd never seen anything like that. And never seen anything like that I could recall. And I started to cry. And I said, wow. And I heard it in my heart, this is what you have to do. Now, this is 1993, and actually, they rerun the episode. And at the time, I had this huge afro, only I had decided to shave my head. I don't know why, but now when people see the video rerun on EWTN, I have priest friends of mine. I saw you, and must be your brother on EWTN. You look the same. And I'm like, well, no, actually, I had a big wad of hair. And if I hadn't, just by some strange quirk around April Fool's Day, shaved my head, no one would recognize me. And so I'm there, and my heart was in my throat. I was crying, and I hear this thought, this is what you need to do. And I thought, well, how do I become a Franciscan, and how do I do this? And all this, but rewinding back, so this crazy parish, I walk in, and it's kind of the same thing, adoration, an army of altar boys, not altar servers, an army of altar boys. And so all of a sudden I thought, this is where I belong. And that was 10 years later. Do the math on that, that's kind of strange. And so I was there, and I kind of hung out in the back row, because I had been kicked out of a church, and I actually had gone to a priest. I thought, I'm going to go find a priest to go to confession to, because I feel really angry at that priest who told me to get out of my church for this kneeling and praying that you're doing. What are you trying to do? Attention, how do you, looking at me. And I was really trying to pray. I was really trying to learn the office. I was really wanting to show God due honor. And so I went to this priest who didn't speak much English, but I said, does anybody here speak English? They were all Polish. And they got the guy who spoke English, and I told him, I said, I got kicked out of the church for kneeling and praying. He looks at me and goes, you obviously did not understand what the priest has said to you. Now I'm thinking, well, no, he spoke pretty good English. He goes, for your penance. Now, the funny thing is, as a priest, I don't think this is a legitimate penance. For your penance, you have to go back to that priest and ask him what he meant and how you must have misunderstood him. Now I'm thinking, and I might point out just in Our Lady's sense of humor that it was very recently that this priest has requested and been granted a leave of absence from the diocese that he is in right now and has faded off the face of the earth. And I went, somebody's got a sense of humor. But I thought, I'll just send him an email. And I wish I had kept his response. It was 2 words. And I won't tell you those words, but if you go into a rough part of town, you'll see it spray painted on a wall somewhere. And I said, dear Father, I was, wanting to know, and I didn't want to put it in the context of confession, because did I misunderstand you with what you told me on whatever the day was? And he came back with that vulgar 2-word phrase. I wish I had saved it. I wish I'd saved it, because now that he's in the newspapers, people are saying to me, do you still have that email? And I said, I don't even still have that computer. But it was quite a shock to me, because I had just gone to confession confessing that I was angry with the priest and was told by another priest that I've obviously misunderstood this, and then I do my best with due diligence to do the penance, and I get that in response. Not even a snotty God bless you, as in, get out of my face, God bless you, click, leave me alone, don't come back. So I end up at this parish, and I'm sitting in the back pew, and after a few Sunday masses and a few weekday masses, somebody says to me, would you like to help take up the collection? And I thought, oh, okay. So I start taking up the collection, and then somebody says, are you a parishioner? And I said, well, no, I'm really not a parishioner. I'm not Slovak. This is an ethnic parish. I don't know that I can join. Oh, we'll just go talk to Father. And I'm like, oh. And I was kind of squirrely about that. I didn't want to talk to a priest. And so I go in, and Father Kosnick says, oh, that's fine, you can become a parishioner. And he says, and then he pulls out this list. He goes, what do you want to do? You've been taking up the collection, you can be an usher. And he goes down through this whole laundry list, and all of a sudden he stops. And he looks at me and he says, you're discerning vocation, aren't you? And I said, well, I haven't told anybody other than God. And he goes, oh, you're going to become a master of ceremonies. First you'll start out as an altar boy, and you'll learn from all the altar boys. And once you learn all the jobs, then you'll become a master of ceremony. He said, I need an adult in charge of the altar boys. And there was an army. There was a whole section of the church blocked off for the altar boys. And he had perfected the ability to determine jobs for the altar boys very creatively. And when he got more altar boys, he got more stuff. So on the elevations at Mass, there was somebody who rang the bell at the epiclesis, so the single ding. There was somebody who rang the bell. There were 3 bells, so somebody rang the bell 1, 2, and 3. There were 3 people to ring the bell for the elevations. So he had turned one guy holding a bell into 4 kids with 4 different bells, and had trained them to do this. And the same thing with candles and torches at the consecration, and serving at the altar and turning the pages like a priest does for a bishop. So he had trained them, and he made an army of altar boys. I think we had 25 to 50 jobs. And so there were usually, and the good part was they all fought over who got the cool jobs. And so somebody had to be in that sacristy and say, who gets the, who gets the good jobs, who gets to carry the cross, who gets to turn the pages, who gets the candles, who gets the torches, who gets to ring the bell, who gets to, and before he was told summarily that you're going back to Slovakia by the Archbishop of Detroit, and when asked for a reason, said, I don't have to give you a reason, I want you out of here. About a year or so ago. And he's back in Slovakia. But so he said he saw something he saw. I have no idea what he saw, but he said, you're discerning vocation, so you're going to learn this. And I fell in love with the altar. So fast forward, I don't know, 7 years, 6, 7 years, he calls me up and he says, the motu proprio, Summorum Pontificum, had just come out that summer. And so he calls me and he says, well, when you're about to be ordained, I want you to, could you take a mass for me? And every seminarian knows not to presume on being ordained, because if a seminary formation member or priest or someone hears you talking about when I'm ordained, they'll throw you out. It's that paper thin. And so he goes, well, when you're ordained, and I said, if I'm ordained. And it kind of went back and forth. He goes, well, okay, fine. If you're ordained, I need somebody to take a mass in June. So you're going to be ordained June 5th. I need somebody to take a mass towards the end of June. And I said, okay. And that's fine. Well, he was doing work on the church, and he had expanded into the gymnasium for a second chapel. And he said, I need somebody, I don't know if the church is going to be done. I need to do it. And because of Summorum Pontificum, so this is 3-4 months later, because of Summorum Pontificum, and I said, oh, I can't do Latin Mass. He goes, no, but you can do a Novus Ordo Mass in Latin and mix it in English if you can't handle it. And I said, well, I suppose I could make that. He goes, we're transitioning towards Summorum Pontificum. So about 2 months later, he says, well, we're now doing an ad orientem in mostly Latin. You do your best, and this and that. So then a couple more months come by, and he says, it's the Latin Mass, and you'll be fine. You won't have any problem with it. So this being 2009, and I'm keying away on the computer, and I ordered the WTN video, I ordered the Father Schmidt's book, I ordered a copy of Fortescue, I ordered a copy of O'Connell. If you don't know these, don't worry. These are like how-to books of how to be a priest and how to offer the Latin Mass. And I had a book from the 1920s, which is a phenomenal book. You can actually fold out pages, and it tells you how loud of a voice, where your hands are, where your eyes are, and what your next move is. And it was a most delightful thing for as a former engineer to see this all spelled out in diagrams and stuff. So I threw myself into this, and then I thought, I'm going to be ordained for the Diocese of Saginaw. They're so progressive that there are women pastors who then just bring the priest in for the priest stuff. So I went to the pastor of my work, who was my mentor, and I was already a transitional deacon, and so I said, well, I had a question. I said, my priest friend in Detroit asked me if I could offer Mass, and this was before you had to have a letter that spelled out all of the things you hadn't done. The new priest good standing letters say things like, he's not dangerous around children, he's never committed a felony, he's never murdered anyone, he's not mentally ill that we know of, and they do all of this stuff, and it's kind of this via negativa of who you are. But so I figured Father Larry Pashik was going to say, no, just don't. So I said, but he goes, well, you're not going to do it in our diocese, are you? And I said, no, I go to Detroit to do it. And so he looks at me and he goes, well, you're not stupid. Just do it. He said, but just remember this, is that you do your best. He said, I watched guys lose their minds diving into the Latin Mass, and they were so afraid of making a mistake that they had a nervous breakdown. He says, and he was, he'd be 90 years old now, so he had experience in this, and he said, give it your best, put your heart into it, and do what you saw with all the videos and things, but I was still nervous, as one should rightly be offering Latin Mass. And so I told Father Kosmik at the Slovak Church, I said, well, I'm still not solid on this. I still don't feel comfortable with this. I watched the videos, I've read the books, I've counted the idea of the rhythm, I've spoken all of the things I can say, to make sure my mouth can form the words and things. And he says, and he also says, oh, by the way, it's a sung Mass now. It's not a low mass, it's a sub mass. So, do you see where I'm going with this? I'm tricked into doing it. So I said, I'm now, I said, you've got to go through this with me. So we go to the side altar. I drive down to Detroit, and it's about 2 hours away. And so we go through this, and we're going through it, and he's kind of going, and he goes, and this, and this, and I said, wait, what about that? He looks at me and goes, what? And I go, well, whether it was, I don't remember what it was, but if there's a sign of the cross, or you missed a genuflection, and he looks at me and he goes, I got an appointment, you know this better than I do. He says, you'll be fine. And so I was tricked into my first Latin Mass, but I fell in love with it. And I asked a priest friend of mine before I did this, I said, tell me what it's like. And he had just learned it, and he was petrified of it. And he was at, you may have heard of the parish in Detroit called Assumption Grotto. He's been the parochial vicar there for a good decade or more. And he said, well, he says, those high-speed kind of moving sidewalk escalator things in Chicago Airport? I go, yeah. He says, well, turn up the speed like 10 times, and offering Mass in Latin, you step onto that, and it spits you out on the other side, and you go, wow. Because, and really, it's a phenomenon that is impossible to describe outside of it. But he's right, and as a priest who's offered the Latin Mass, and it's interesting because you find the strangest nuts in the strangest place. There's a Franciscan priest named Marie Bodo, and he's kind of left of center. But he wrote a book on the sacraments, and he wrote his reflections on holy orders. And one of the things he said that is very true, and fits that better than jumping on an escalator and getting spit out on the other side, that's probably not quite the best way to describe offering the holy sacrifice of the Masses, but Father Bodo said, the priest doesn't write the Mass. The Mass writes the priest. And so to offer the Latin Mass for a priest is frightening because you have to be willing to let God write you. And I don't mean write you a letter, I mean create you and recreate you and continue to recreate you in the image of the Son. So indeed I was tricked into the Latin Mass, and I have to admit I wasn't really an aficionado of the Latin Mass prior to that. I didn't think I would ever do it after that one time. But after that one time, I went to dinner with my parents immediately afterwards. And I said to my folks, and they go, what was it like? And I said, if anybody, I said, Archbishop Carlson from St. Louis was the Bishop of Saginaw. I said, Archbishop Carlson is the only person crazy enough to ordain your son to the priesthood. I said, if any pope is ever crazy enough to make me a bishop, I will never let a priest out of holy orders until he has spent a month offering the Latin Mass. Because in the new Mass, the new Mass is all things aside, of opinions of it and how badly it can be malformed and things like that, is still the Mass, but it doesn't write you as firmly. It's like it's more. It's way easier to mix and match and abuse it, and that's a difficulty. The old Mass, I'm constantly. How did I put it once? They said, "What are you doing? What are you doing when you're talking quietly?" I said, "I'm busy doing priest stuff." Whereas in the new Mass, somebody else is doing something for me. Somebody else is reading the readings. Somebody else is reading the petitions. Somebody else is, and it's not just an altar server. It's like everybody. Somebody else is distributing communion. Somebody else is clearing off the altar. Somebody else is moving stuff around. And I do remember one of my first Masses wanting to slap the hand of the transitional deacon who was clearing the altar off before we ever started communion, because he was like 10 steps ahead of the rest of the congregation. And he was a classmate of mine, and all of a sudden, I'm reaching for the book to turn the page so that I can say the prayers before one receives communion, which I had not fully memorized. And all of a sudden, I'm reaching for the page, and he shuts the book, takes the book, and walks away with it. And I wanted to go, bring it back, but he was gone. And I thought, well, I can chase him down, but that's going to look kind of silly. And so there's so much going on, and there's so many players on that altar, each with their own idea of what's going on, that it's hard to allow the new Mass to write you, because there's all these other people. You've got too many cooks. And that's just my personal opinion. But in the Latin Mass, I'm on that escalator. And I'm not even looking at y'all. And so I don't know if everybody's asleep or if everybody's attentive or if some people are standing up and walking out. I'm too busy because I'm moving at high speeds. And so my impression then to my parents was any priest who would come to me and tell me he's leaving the priesthood would say, learn to offer the Latin Mass and then tell me that you don't want to be a priest anymore. And so from a priest perspective, that's the Latin Mass. Now from a lay perspective, because I, as a priest now who's labeled, does the Latin Mass, I get from bishops and monsignors and priests, well, you know, you're not the FSSP. Well, you know, you're not. And I said, no, I understand. And one of the things, you know, in the midst of some of these conversations, I felt I was really being scrutinized. You know, are you a schismatic? I've been called a schismatic. I've been called all sorts of names. Been told I hate the church. I've been told I hate the Lord and all of these things because I love the Mass. And that kind of doesn't compute. And luckily, I have this ability, uncanny ability, I think, through God's grace, to think rationally. And so I tell people, they say, well, I just don't know. A lot of people say, you know, and people my age, I'm 57, my age or younger, will say, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And I said, oh, that's a fair enough assessment. You're right. And I tell them, what do you do at adoration? Well, I pray. That's really all I want you to do at a Latin Mass is pray. Whether you pray that I hurry up and get through it, whether you pray that I don't drop something, whether you pray for your prayer intentions or the intentions of your friends, pray. And I've actually taken that and turned that around because over the last 3 years, the first year once every other month, the second year once a month, and the third year every week, I've been offering Mass at a preschool through 12th grade Great Books Academy in Napa, California. And this last school year when we started, I remember the headmaster saying, well, this is going to be kind of a shock because he says some of the parents pulled their kids out if it was the Latin Mass or scheduled dentist appointments for 8 o'clock in the morning. So they wouldn't, and so he says, that's not going to happen. And I said, no, I understand. He says, so give them an introduction. And I'm thinking, how do I explain to 4-year-olds up through 18-year-olds in a way that, and so I told them pretty much what I just said. I said, when you're at regular Mass that you're accustomed to in your parishes and what's done the other 4 days a week here at the Academy, I said, everybody wants you to make the responses. They want you to sing the songs. They want you to sit, stand, kneel at the right time. Whatever parish you attend in the Valley, they may want you to hold hands during the Our Father and then lift them up high at the doxology. And they want you to do all these things. They may even want you to take up the gifts. They might want you to serve on the altar. They might want you to do something. I said, it's all about do. I said, I only have one thing I want you to do. And I said, I don't care if you're 4 years old, if you're 10 years old, 12 years old, 14 years old, or 18 years old. I want you to do one thing, pray. And they all kind of look at me and I said, and when you get distracted, not if, because it's a long thing. I said, I got the book up there so I don't forget where I'm at. I said, when you get distracted and you collect yourself, pray. And keep going back to praying. I said, you can follow along in the red book if you like, that's fine. You might get lost in the red book. The thing that I was told by the judicial vicar of the Byzantine Eparchy of Parma, Ohio, is I keep getting tricked by these Eastern Europeans. He tricked me into celebrating the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, which only after I had done it in Eastern vestments was told you're supposed to bring Roman vestments. And I said, no, he told me not to bring anything. I was on the phone with him before I drove. Father, I'm heading off to your parish. Mass is in an hour. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Is there anything I need to bring? Nope, David, bring nothing. So I didn't. So he tricked me, and I was vested like an Eastern priest, which is really cool. So the first time I offered Mass in the Divine Liturgy of St. John Chrysostom, I was tricked. But in the midst of it, he says, what did you think? Now the funny part is their book is like this thick. It's hardly, we've got, lectionaries and missals and gospel books and all this stuff, and it was just this little thin book. And I said, he goes, did you get lost? That was, I think, his big question. And I said, well, yeah. And he said, good. He goes, if you're not praying hard enough, if you don't get lost. And there's something to think about. You're not into it enough if you don't get lost. And he's right, because we're diving into the mysteries of God. And heresy is when we think we figured out who God is and we want to tell everybody that, our perspective of God, and this is the beginning and the end, and that's Arius, and that's Nestorius, and that's every good heretic and heresiarch, and every person who created a heresy, or at least was stupid enough to have one named after them. And when we think we figured out God, and I always call that a shortcoming of the Mass and the vernacular, is that we're under the mistaken impression that we've got God all figured out. And we really don't. And there was this struggle, I don't know if you followed it like a priest would, but when they came up with the new translation, there was all this hoo-ha among bishops and priests about the word consubstantial in the creed. And I said, well, wait, Santa Claus punched Arius in front of the emperor and got thrown in jail over the word consubstantial. It's good enough for St. Nicholas to have to break the law in front of the emperor and to be thrown in jail and stripped of his rank until somehow the emperor changed his mind and pardoned him. Then it's good enough for me. And the same thing with words like ineffable and all this. We need to know that we don't know who and what God is, that God is beyond our comprehension. He is beyond our explanation. He is something bigger than we are. And when we have this idea that Jesus is my friend and I've got him all figured out, and that I've got the Trinity figured out, and I've got all that figured out, then we run the risk of heresy. We run the risk of undercutting God, underselling him to ourselves and to others, but also underselling what he can do for us, which is transform us from who we are to who he has created us to be. And that's sometimes, it's sometimes an infinite distance, but he is infinite and capable of doing that. So a little bit about myself. So I got tricked into it, and maybe you got tricked into the Latin Mass today. That's all right. Just keep praying, and when it gets to be too much, collect yourself and keep praying. I am the third of 5 kids. I was born in 1962, right when that missal was finalized. Actually 6 months before the Second Vatican Council, on the feast of Our Lady's Seat of Wisdom. And so I attribute anything intelligent I say to her, because she's obviously been working on me now for 57 years. And so as a kid, my first memories of the Mass are fighting with my brothers over who got to be the priest when we played Mass. 2 flashlights on the edge of the coffee table, 3 or 4 handkerchiefs spread out on the table from my dad's handkerchief drawer, marshmallows, which we had to climb up on the counter to get off the top shelf where all the candy was kept, smushed under the dictionary and sat on until they were flat and thin. And then a Hawaiian punch and a wine glass. Again, we had to climb up on the counter to get it off the top shelf before my mother caught us. Eventually she realized what we were doing. A bathrobe put on backwards with the belt taken off and draped over your shoulders. And then the dictionary opened up, because that was the biggest book we had in the house. And so it kind of went as best as it could, and then I think we had to wait until my brother made his first communion, because he had the little book with the Mass in it. We tried to follow it, but by then the Mass was already changed, and we were trying to figure out what was going on. My second big memory of the Mass is right before my own first communion. And I was, and I have to say, I apologize for my stupidity. But I also look at it as, it gives me a little bit of insight into kids, because we've got kids who say Hail Mary full of grapes, a lot of them in Napa, and because we've got grapes everywhere. But kids say things because they hear it and they don't know the word grace, because nobody's ever said it to them and nobody's ever explained it to them. So we were supposed to make a drawing, and I loved it. They used to give us 11 by 17 paper, and we would make a drawing of something. One time I had to do a report on Islam, and I had a big brown sheet of 11 by 17 paper, and in the middle was this tiny figure of a man bent down like this, and a little block over on the far side. So there's like, my drawing was that, and then I colored the sky yellow and blue, and I colored the sand brown, and I was very proud of that. I didn't know much about it other than they pointed themselves towards this thing, and I drew a little cube, and that was what it came up. Well, so I drew a picture of people receiving communion, and I covered the whole thing, and I kind of tried to make it look like the church we were in, which was actually the gymnasium. And I wrote, I can't wait to receive First Holy Communion, because after that we go out for breakfast. I apologize that I did not have the piety that I perhaps should have as a child, and my mother would not let me turn that in. I had to get a new piece of paper, redraw the church, and she said, you don't understand this, but you will. I'm eager to receive First Holy Communion because I will receive Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity. I was a kid, I was 6 or 7 years old. I didn't understand it, but she made sure I knew it. She shot above where I was so that I would aspire to be better than I am. And so that was age 7. And so when I was 10, so sort of in 1972, the old mass was still kind of allowed for funerals and for old people, and everything was the new mass. And I was so excited to become an altar boy because I was finally going to learn Latin, or at least so I thought. And so we had to stand outside of the chapel and wait while Monsignor talked to all the other altar boys. They were still boys. And all of a sudden, one by one, the older boys all came out and punched us in the shoulder. And we're like, is this some initiation or something or whatever? They go, no, you brats don't have to learn Latin. And I almost got out of the line, but I thought, well, I live 5 miles away and I don't know how to find my way home on foot. I got to stay here. I don't want to do this anymore. And I remember thinking that as a kid, I was so eager to pursue this in a way that was beyond me. I really wanted that. I wanted to stretch, at age 10. And I remember telling my mom, well, I don't want to do this anymore. She said, no, I signed the papers, I signed the permission slips, you're on the schedule as of next week, they sent it in the mail, you're going. And so I did, and I served at the altar a little unwillingly for a kid. And again, that's why I find saints like St. Francis or like St. Vincent de Paul, who are kind of sort of doing things for the wrong reasons, or God works with us where we are if we allow Him. And so I did that for a while, and I grew to like it, but I never really got it. And then we ended up moving out to the suburbs, and I kind of said, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And instead, I said, I want a guitar. And I had, any kid, it was the 70s, every kid wanted a guitar. And my mother said, I didn't want to do anything at church. I wanted nothing to do at church. And my mother says, only if you use it at church. So then we get all kind of introduced into this because it's, it's not going to sit on the shelf. And point of fact, though, is I had always had those little, I don't know what they cost back in the dark ages, but you can still, I think, get it for $9.95, the plastic guitars. And it would eventually break in a scuffle among 4 boys until it was just in shreds, or I would turn the strings as tight as I could to see, could I make it into a bow and arrow or something like that. So my mother was rightfully concerned that if they bought me a real guitar, I would break it, because she's probably right. So it had to be used. It stayed in a very place of honor in the house so that I wouldn't break it. And I couldn't take it out of the case without an adult supervising me, which is probably smart. And I think I gave it to my nephew, and I think he has it, or my sister sold it at a garage sale or something, but it lasted into my adulthood. It was a little tiny, half-size, three-quarter-size guitar for a kid. So I remember they taught us the Beatles songs, and they taught us Peter, Paul, and Mary, and this nun would buy 33 records, and she'd listen to them with headphones on and play her guitar, and she'd write chords out for us, because we were paying money to the school, but the school was trying to put as little money into this program as possible. And my mother went to the school and said, well, I thought you were supposed to do this in church. And so they're like, well, we haven't gotten that far. And my mother kind of pushed, saying, no, we spent a good $55 on that guitar, and I've got 5 kids, and $55 goes a long way in the 1970s, so what are we going to do? So I ended up being handed the hymnal and trying to figure this out. Again, I'm 10 years old. And somehow between my mother and I humming songs and playing on one of those little plastic organs, figured out the chord progressions. I can play the notes, but I don't know what a chord is, so I'm playing the chords until something sounded right. And we're penciling this in a hymnal. And so I can say the big afro, and I was the kid with the guitar. But simultaneously, the Detroit Archdiocese was closing Catholic schools. It was part of Cardinal John Dearden's perspective on getting us out of the ghetto. We were going to be mainstreamed, and so we're just pushing everybody out. And it's the mindset of that era. In my hyper-progressive homeland in central Michigan, it's the same thing. We're pushing them out of church so that they can change the world. We don't care if they're evangelized, catechized, or anything, just get them out of the church. And it makes no sense, but it sounds really good if you say it over and over and over and over and over again for 50 years, and then nobody has an argument for you because you've shouted them all out of the building. So in the mix of all this were books, textbooks, and that were being thrown out. And so my aunt is a sister of St. Joseph. And so she would be at a church or a school, or she'd hear of a church or a school that was closing, and she would grab all these books. So I had Catholic school books from every grade, from the 1950s and the 1960s, and they lined shelves in the basement. And being Michigan, and it being the 70s, and my parents being frugal, we had no air conditioning, so we lived in the basement on hot days if we couldn't find a friend who had a swimming pool. And so in that basement, in the summer, in those blazing hot July days, I would sit there and read all this stuff, and I thought this is kind of different than what I'm being taught. And when I would ask a question, I'd be told, well, you don't understand this, you're just a kid, and so don't ask those questions. And as it went along, the books or the places that closed, seminaries were closing, convents were closing. And my aunt would show up on a weekend for a family barbecue with a big box of books. And and one of the excuses I was constantly given was Vatican II. The same way the Irish would say Cromwell. Why is there a ruined church here, Cromwell? In the 70s and the 80s, why is it this way? Vatican II. So I found sitting at the bottom of this box of books and it's a horrible translation. It's translated by a Dominican who I think left his vocation. But it's the English translation of the documents of Vatican II. So I was like, I got it. And now I can go, I can look, why is there guitars and I never found it. And I read that cover to cover to cover in the basement between reading Catholic books from the 50s and the 60s. I'm going through this and I'm looking for this. And there's nowhere in the index does it say guitar, nowhere in the index does it say to get rid of the statues, get rid of the communion rails, turn the altar. Nowhere in there it says that. And around the same time, my grandmother passed away. And for my confirmation, I was given a Vatican II missal. And when my grandmother passed away, I was given her 1962 missal. So now, an inquisitive teenager, I'm putting these side by side and going, and found the things that matched. The entrance antiphon, the communion antiphon, sign of the, certain things all matched. And so all of a sudden, as the kid with the guitar, I'm looking at the entrance antiphon, which strangely enough, they used to print in the missalettes. And I looked at that and I said, well, maybe we should do music that matches the entrance antiphon instead of just picking a song we liked. Maybe we should use a song that matches the communion antiphon instead of just... So all of a sudden, this is interesting because it's the premise of crushing the bruised reed and smush or quenching the smoldering wick. This is what our Lord says, don't do that. And where I was being led closer and closer and closer to this. And so I managed to pull off a semblance of something halfway okay, but it was still goofy. I mean, I'm sorry, but that whole era was strange era. And but with it getting a deeper and deeper understanding. So when I ended up in Hansville in 1993 or 4, all of a sudden it all went click. They were chanting the entrance antiphon. They were chanting the communion antiphon. They were playing a motet during the offertory. Even though it was still the new Mass, they had put Latin in places where I had never even knew it could go. And so that really, it clicked in a way that I wanted to hang up the guitar and just walk away. And so I started praying about what that would mean. And I thought about going into seminary. And actually I thought about going into seminary back in my late teens. And I saw a drawing of him actually around the corner, Father Solanus Casey. At least I think that's Father Solanus Casey. He's hard to miss. Father Solanus Casey, Blessed Solanus Casey now, is a phenom in Detroit area. And everybody knew him. I mean, Sister Geraldine Arnold, who recently deceased in the last several years, remembers the 1920s, being a little girl, and her mother had all the linen soaking in lye, sodium hydroxide, very caustic, and she had watched her mom scrubbing, so she grabs the washboard and she goes over there unattended, sticks it in there and starts going as like a child, a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old, "Mommy, Mommy, look, I'm helping you clean," and burn the skin off of her arms as a child. And so at the time, the doctor's like, well, she'll be crippled and do what you can and this and that, and they take her to Solanus. And Father Solanus Casey always would just say, kind of like Padre Pio, a slightly different variant, but Padre Pio would say, pray, hope, and don't worry. Father Solanus would say, thank God ahead of time. Know what your intention is, know that God desires for you what is best for you. And so pray, but pray in thanksgiving. And she said, about a week or so later, he said, don't worry. A week or so later, the hard scars on this baby's arms, fell off like a snake, and underneath it was brand new skin. And to give you a for instance of who this woman was, she was a very talented seamstress, and she could crochet anything. And up until she started to fade, she was still crocheting things and sewing things. And I remember going to her and saying, oh, Geraldine, I stepped the hem out of my pants. Could you take care of this for me? And she'd be, here you go, without even batting an eye, well into her 80s. But so the scarring, the damage, or whatever, obviously was overcome. And it's one of, you have to be dead before you can have miracles by the Congregation for the Canonizations, but still, that Solanus' prayers were answered in a powerful way. I mean, to know people that interacted with the saint. And I always told the joke, when my mother, well, it's not a joke, in 1957, when my sister was born, my mother was told, well, you're too frail to have kids, any more kids. And so they went down to the Capuchins, and Solanus had just died. And they paid for masses to be said that my father would have a son. Well, he's got 4. And they just kept coming for the next 10 years. And my joke is, it cost $10 to enroll in the Mass Society. It cost $1,000 to get him to stop praying. My dear mother did. But it just, nonetheless, the whole point is that prayer really does work, and these experiences of this. But so I wanted to go to seminary, and so we went to the Capuchins. They were digging up Solanus. They were starting the cause for his canonization. And so we were able to go into the cemetery where he was just in this little plot of dirt with all these other headstones, no raised anything, because the Franciscans are very poor in how they treat themselves poorly, but their churches are beautiful. Mother Angelica's place in Hansville. Some people say, oh, this money could be used, ... the Judas song. But really what it amounts to is that St. Francis wanted the best for God, and he lived his life embracing Lady Poverty, and knowing that the best is yet to come, that I don't need anything here. All I need here is God, so that I can have everything with him in eternity. And so we go into the church, which was all hand-carved oak. Michigan used to be covered in oak forests. And statues on the left side and the right side of the altar. One side were saints, discernible Franciscan saints, carved life-size, falling down in adoration before the altar. The ones in the front were on their knees. The other ones they were carved so beautifully that you could tell that they were moving, or they felt like they were moving. And on the other side were just plain folk. There was a farmer, there was a housewife, there was a lady with a baby in her arms, there was kids, there were grown-ups, there was a soldier, a sailor, there was a mechanic, there was a guy with a hard hat, there was a constructor, everything. So you saw the saints, you saw the church triumphant, you saw the church militant, and this beautiful hand-carved high altar. And so I'll do my best to imitate this. We're being given a tour by some young postulant or novice, and we get in there and he goes, we're going to tear all of this out, because you can't have a soldier holding a sword and a sailor holding a gun. Well, we are people of peace, and we need to get out of here. We need to get that all out of here. And he said it with a very discernible lisp, because my brothers and I made fun of it on the way home until my father told me, don't make me come back there. But they asked, is anyone discerning a vocation? And all eyes turned to me, age 16. And they go, oh, we'll take you back and you can meet the novices and the postulants. And it was like the road company for La Cage aux Folles. It was just a bunch of weirdos. And I was a kid from the country, and I'm sitting there going, this ain't right. I don't know who who these people are, what they think they are. But they were $3 bills and crazy and bizarre, and now they're all in charge. And so I came back and I said, I'm not sure, Dad. My dad goes, well, talk to Father Obahowski. Father Obi will get set you straight. So I kind of delayed it for a while, and I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and I still thought about the time I was 18, I still was thinking about seminary. And I said, well, I guess I better go talk to Father Obi. And I had cut his grass, and I had moved stuff for him, and I cleaned his garage, and scraped the tar from cigarette smoke off of the windows. I thought they were tinted in his car. I didn't realize that was part of this accumulation, so I'm in there with the razor blade going, I hope this isn't tinting. And I said to Father Obi, I'm thinking about going to the seminary, Father, but I don't know. And he goes, well, why don't you know? And I told him what I experienced at the Capuchins when their novices were there down at what's now called the Father Solanus Casey Center. And there are no novices there. There's nobody living there. It's just kind of, I guess there's 3 priests living somewhere in an apartment or a condo nearby. And he looks at me, and in his crusty way of handling things, he says, listen, Junior. He said, things are kind of screwed up right now in the church, and I'm not going to go into it. Why don't you wait a few years until it settles out? Now, this is 1979. He was waiting for it to settle out. And he said, what's your dad do? And I says, he's an engineer, he works for General Motors. Do what your dad does. And then once you get your feet on the ground and the church figures out what it's supposed to be doing, become a priest. Well, I don't know if the church has ever figured out what it's supposed to be doing yet. I mean, it's scary at times. And it's scary to be a priest, but I went into engineering, and then I went into the Navy after I'd been an engineer. And this was after the Mother Angelica situation. I was an engineer then. I was living the life of Riley. I was pulling in a very nice salary. I was a research engineer for General Motors. I had an apartment. I was contemplating getting a place up north. I was contemplating getting another car. I was contemplating buying a boat. And then I ended up at Mother Angelica's, and get this right between the eyes, this is what you should be doing. And I went, no. So I had to think about how that worked, and that kind of led into the Navy. And at the time, I remember saying, well, this doesn't make sense. And a friend of mine who was a very prayerful individual told me, go in front of the Blessed Sacrament, but I don't know how you're going to go in there because they shut down the Adoration Chapel because they couldn't fill the schedule and blah, blah, blah. And this by now is 1990s. And so I said, oh, don't worry, I got keys to every church in this diocese. My aunt was a nun, she had keys to everything, and she'd leave them in a box, and I'd figure out what key went where. So I went in and to adore the Blessed Sacrament all by myself in a church that I wasn't supposed to be in, and knelt down and said, okay, Lord, what do you want me to do? And it kind of came down to, he said, well, sign the papers, go to the Navy. And I went, are you sure you don't mean seminary? And it kind of came back as, have I ever let you down before? And I'm getting choked up because I'm remembering the power of the moment. And I stood up to leave and go to the phone and call, no cell phones, 1990 something. I was going to go call the recruiter and say, all right, I'm in. I'll sign the papers tomorrow. And as I stood up, again, I got that feeling, and I get this, I thought you promised me an hour. So God in his generosity had given me the direction I needed. And here I am going, let's go. And he's like, shut up and pray. And sure, I was told midnight, so all of a sudden I prayed for an hour, and it was 5 minutes to midnight. I called the guy, and he took the call, and he said, all right, come in tomorrow and sign the papers. Now, I could never have imagined what I learned in the military would have come in handy, but it did. I was talking to Debbie, and I said, she was like, why are so many priests former engineers? And then also, there's a lot of us who are former military as well. And there's also, let's see, make sure, okay, I'm at an hour, so I'm trying to put them, you're all right, okay. So, what I was talking at one point to was, after the military, I was talking to the vocation director for the Archdiocese of Detroit. He's just been given a really charity parish. He may make Monsignor before he dies if he gets his way, but he's still not old enough. He's younger than me, so he's got to live another 10 years before he can be named Monsignor under the new rules. But he sat down and he goes, wow, so you were a failure as an engineer, you screwed up the military, and now you want to be like me. There's a word for this. That word is narcissism. And when you're a priest or when you put on the collar, people will fawn on you whether you're a jerk or a saint. And you got to be careful. And in the Novus Ordo, you're up there and you have to be careful as a priest not to go, hey, I told a stupid joke that wasn't even funny and they all laughed. Let me try that again. And next thing you know, it becomes all about, but this is the temptation of priests. This is a priest's side of the altar temptation, is to think it's all about you. And there's methods and ways that we can work around that. And one of them is the extraordinary form. The extraordinary form teaches you custom of the eyes. You're not turning around and going, Dominus vobisco. You're not working the crowd. You're looking 6 feet in front of you, and you are the lamb about to be slain. And you don't learn that. That's not in the books for the new Mass, but it's in the books for the old Mass that tells you why does the priest maintain custom of the eyes? Why is the priest not, he's addressing the people of God, which is the church, as Christ. He's not talking to John and Mary and Trixie and Bob. And so that was my first exposure. Well, I guess getting the 2-word response from that one priest was my first exposure to the narcissism of presbytery. But this was really kind of a knockdown, right? I was a well-respected engineer. I had patents to my name. I was doing research and cutting-edge things, which now are in your cars, which were not in cars then. And in the military, I had an honorable discharge. I had over 1,100 flight hours, 155 successful missions. They were begging me to stay in, and I said I can't, because I had gotten a further call to now is the time to cut bait and fish for men, to go out and become a priest now. Still without any real instructions for how to do it. But so, in the military, well, as an engineer, I worked in computer systems and logic, and electronics, and no matter how hard I held my breath and yelled, if the program wasn't running right, the program wasn't going to run wrong, or it wasn't going to fix itself if I yelled at it, or if I gave it a stern talking to and told it Vatican II. None of that was going to work. It had to work. If the circuit was wrong, there was no amount of yakety yak that I could come up with or dressing down that I could do, and that circuit would not fix it. I had to make sure the circuit was right. I had to make sure the software was right. Otherwise, it wasn't going to work. And in the same sense of any form of building something, the bridge is not strong enough. If you designed a bridge that's not going to stand up, it's not going to stand up better if you yell Vatican II at it. And so I had to be rational and logical, and I have been told that I am rational to a fault, which, okay, I've also been told I'm honest to a fault, which is fine too. But so I learned to think, and this is one of the things, because the point of this conference, the next 3 conferences will cover what is it, what's a Catholic supposed to do in the middle of the chaos? How do we fight the mystery of iniquity? How do we go against this? Well, the first thing is that we need to be reasonable. We need to realize that in the final gospel, we hear, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and the Word was God. In the Greek, this is just verbum in Latin, so it's word. In the Greek, it's logos. Logos is logic. Logos is reason. Logos is structure. Logos is order. So Greek has a depth that we lose. And so God is ordered, logical, reasonable. And in my experience in deliverance ministry, in my experience in dealing, most of the time dealing with exorcists and letting them handle the things, but in trying to make sense of things, if something doesn't make sense and consistently does not compute, there's most likely something diabolical involved. There's something wrong. So if we want to be attracted, if we want to be working with God, things make sense. He created the world out of chaos. He didn't leave chaos behind for us. He created order out of chaos. And so the first thing that if we're going to deal with is we have to deal with this crazy world right now. We have to be reasonable. We have to be rational. We have to be ordered. We have to trust that God is. The second thing, being in the military, taught me discipline. When the rest of the church, the seminarians were being told, you need to be dating, you need to date guys and girls to see which one you like. Your philosophy class will be listening to the Rolling Stones. If you want to play it backwards, that's fine, and then tell us how you feel. That's not philosophy. Philosophy is thinking about thinking, order. And so I joined the military, where one stray comment in boot camp, and you are what we used to call self-destructing. You start out, you do one push-up, then you do one sit-up, then you do one jumping jack, then you do one mountain climber. Google it, it's kind of I don't think I can do them anymore. And then after that, you do 2 of each, and then you do 3 of each, and then you do 4 of each, and then you do 5 of each, and then you do 6 of each until you can't move. And then they go take a shower. And then you're done. One stray word in boot camp, you are self-destructed. You will be put out for self-destructed. Everybody stands at attention or parade rest while you do that in the middle of the floor, and they just go, they don't want to hiccup, they don't want to breathe out of sequence, you're just like, I'm not gonna, and I self-destructed once, and that never happened again. I made one snide comment to someone, to somebody from another unit who was in charge, and that was met with, all right, Jenuwine, self-destruct. And it was like, oh no, because I watched plenty of guys do it. But so I learned discipline, and I learned perseverance. I was a naval air crewman. All my classmates were 17 or 18, and learning water survival, which if you ever watched the movie An Officer and a Gentleman, where he has to do all the things before they let him get into a plane. We did the same thing, but we did the enlisted version of it, which is a lot rougher. And we don't get the nice uniforms, and we don't get the dances and the dates. But I learned that, and I learned to persevere. And I had, one of the ways I had to set my mind in order to finish a particular evolution in water survival was to have to say, I will die trying to succeed. And that was the day that I was counting on them pulling me out of the bottom of the pool, resuscitating me, and sending me to Hawaii, which was my second option. And instead, I finished, because my fear no longer was a fear. I was like, nope, we're going to die doing this. This is how we're going to do it. But a level of perseverance that maybe in a 21st century American mindset is reasonably frightening. Whereas maybe in the Middle Ages, people were like, well, we're going to go evangelize, St. Francis, we're going to go evangelize the Sultan. Yeah, okay. I could die tomorrow if a knight walks by and decides he doesn't like the look of me, he can just cut my head off. So if I'm going to die, I may as well die doing something productive. And so the military taught me discipline, perseverance, and a certain boldness that I think is one of the things that makes me the priest that I am. So instead of being taught being lax and whatever you want, and no discipline, and make sure you had sex with everything possible so you know which way you swing before we ordain you, that weird mentality that existed, and to some extent exists in other seminaries even to this day, was gone and was replaced with something. And the logic, that they didn't learn in philosophy is part of who I am as a former software designer and circuit board sort of guy. And so, you failed. I don't think I failed. God put me in a position where I could learn reason to a fault. God put me in a place where I learned discipline and perseverance unto death. Because the seminaries weren't doing it. They weren't cutting it. And that, Debbie, is why there are so many engineers who are priests, and why there's so many military men who are priests. And why usually the engineers and the military men are the guys who kind of get sidelined by their bishops, because the bishop just wants to yell Vatican II at you, and that's supposed to change everything. Or the bishop wants to just yell, pastoral, be more pastoral, and it doesn't cut it. You've got to do what's right And you've got to trust, and you've got to, and the final thing though is what this whole thing was, trusting God. Have I ever let you down? And he said that to me innumerable times. And I've gone back to him with that. After getting kicked out of seminary the first time, and then trying to figure out where I was supposed to go next, and finishing up a theological degree using, thanks be to God, the GI Bill, I walked up to the tabernacle and I said, you told me you'd never let me down, don't let me down now. I have no idea how to become a priest. I know how to get a degree. I said, but I still don't get this thing. I said, so you either have to strike me mute at the right time, or trip me at the right time, or put me with the bishop who's going to get me, because I don't know how to do this. I said, I'll get the degree, you make me a priest. Well, I suppose the rest is history. But it isn't even that. It's been 10 years of, as I said to my dear mother just the other day, I said, every time it seemed like it was the darkest, God has brought me out of it into something so far beyond what my wildest dreams were. And so leaving Detroit with all of its politics and going to Saginaw under Archbishop Carlson was a gift for those 5 years. Spending 7 years being persecuted as they kept dragging that diocese, kicking and screaming back into the early 70s, and watching this and seeing their anger and their hatred and what they, the brainwashing attempts and things, and then realizing that I'd been trained how not to be brainwashed by the Navy, that I had been trained how to stick it out and how to do these things. And then finally, in taking the advice of my spiritual director, had told me for 5 years, get out, get out, get out. And it wasn't until I was told by several other people to get out, including a curial cardinal who says you really need to get out of there, that I said, oh, because I just presumed nobody understood. And so thick-headed as I am, after 7 years, which possibly, I ended up in California, where I offer the Latin Mass all the time, where my bishop wears a cassock, and if you wear a cassock, he doesn't look at you when you say over a drink and a cigar, well, I've been called Vatican II. He goes, so have I. And I go, well, you were never called schismatic. And he goes, oh, shut up. And that's fine too. Because the church is alive, and the church is not me, the church is the people of God, and I'm here as the servant of the people of God. And that is the mindset. The opposite of that is narcissism. You're here to serve me, you're here to give me what I want, and I'm the little boy and I'm the brat, and everybody's got to give me what they want, what I want, and if they don't give me what I want, I'm taking my ball and I'm leaving. And that's not the priesthood, and that's not who we are. So the way to survive in the church is to be reasonable. The way to survive in the church is to know what's going on. The way to survive in the church is to recognize what has happened and trust, though, that God is in charge. And so we do this by discipline. We do this by prayer. And we do this by reason. And that's kind of the way the talks are going to go tomorrow, is through those things with hopefully some relevant stories mixed in there. But what it really comes down to is, it's no worse. St. Vincent de Paul wanted to get out of being a poor guy. He wanted to be a chaplain attached to a wealthy family, and he wanted to gamble and drink. God had other plans. And so in the midst of knowing what I know about a lot of things and a lot of people and a lot of church, I know that God can make it right. And like he said to me back in 1990, have I ever let you down? And he won't. We have to trust, pray, and don't worry. And so, in as much as I might tell you stories that'll make your hair fall out, hopefully not, in much as I might tell you stories that are shocking or scandalous, the point is not to shock or scandalize you, but to let you realize that God is way bigger than anything that anybody can throw at him, and that we need to persevere, and we need to get holier than we think we can, and we do that at his hands and with his grace. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God,
Pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Our Lady of Sorrows,
Pray for us.
Our Lady Seat of Wisdom,
Pray for us.
the Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
May the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, keep your hearts and your minds in the knowledge and love of God and of His Son, our Lord Jesus Christ. And may Almighty God bless you, the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you for your kind attention. Sorry I went over.